thank you for joining. Not that you had much choice with a single track. So this talk's a little bit different for me. I usually do sort of technical talks. I want to teach you something that I've kind of realised and learned. I've called this Going Faster for Less Effort. I'm going to tell you a story of how I learned this Go Faster approach. So I've called it a different perspective on self-learning. Who here has learned something new this year? Nobody's learned anything new. Okay, so half the people here have learned something new. So in life we learn lots of different things. So I want to talk you through a model and a concept which I've been using. So what is this talk? It's a self-inspired journey, as I said. I've done something in the last year which has helped me learn in a different way, which I want to share with you. So we're going to uncover what is this going faster for less effort. What will it allow us to do? Why am I even bothering saying it to you? Now, in an ever-changing technology world, we have to learn new things every day. There's tweaks all the time, a new library comes out, we have to download it and install it and rewrite our applications overnight. So we can, by thinking slightly different, we can learn new things faster. We can begin to think more efficiently. We don't need this whirlwind happening. We can think clearly. We can use our time much more effectively and much more wisely. And I don't know about you, but when I start a new project, I try and think about the end goal first, and then how do I get there the fastest. Now, I don't know about you, but learning new things is quite a challenge. Why can't I do this? So we can try to break things down and avoid, why can't I do this? All this frustration in trying to learn new things. Now, none of this talk is groundbreaking. It's not something I've invented. These are just simple rules and principles which I've begun to follow, which you can as well and adapt. Now, I'm going to share with you a non-technical story, but you can apply this thinking to your code and anything else that you do. So, the next time that you learn something new, I mean, who here, before they were doing Angular, for example, learned React or Vue or HTML or JavaScript, all these things. So there's a whole pipeline before of where you're currently at that you've already learned a lot of things. So when we want to learn something new next, before we just dive in, and we do this all the time, it's like when you jump in your car in the morning, you turn it on, you drive, you don't think about it. So my idea is, let's just think about it and try and develop some new good habits. Which led me to this idea that everything we do is somewhat learned. So we can have things like coding. We learn how to code, and then we can dive deeper, we can look at frameworks, we can look at libraries. But what else do we have? We have simple human things, such as eating and drinking. This bottle, for example. I can learn how to sip, I can cut my food. We have to learn these things as infants, and we grow up, and some people probably hold the knife and fork around the wrong way still. We also have sports and exercising. These things we don't just wake up and learn how to sprint 100 meters in 10 seconds. So some ideas are swimming, jogging, tennis. These are all things that hand-eye coordination or physical activities. We all need to learn them. And the fact that I'm actually stood here making sounds and you can understand, hopefully, what I'm saying, is that I've learned how to speak English and you've learned how to listen to my English. Now, language is a bit more complex. We have speech, we have written, we have writing with a pen. You have to learn how to write letters, and obviously typing on a keyboard. So there's lots of concepts, which led me to the idea that the way we learn something new is also learned. So when you were younger, you were taught how to learn, or you experimented and found out how to learn new things. But I had this realization that maybe the way that I was learning wasn't the best way of learning. So this talk is streamlining that approach. So if everything is learned, maybe there's an optimal way that we can learn. We can cut out some of the noise, we can keep more focus, less distractions. We can think about things better. And I like to use this word pattern. So when we're dealing with software and architecture, things like this, they're all patterns. And the way that we learn those patterns is also a pattern. How you approach something, how you look at a bird's eye view, or you dive down into an API, reading source code, how we learn all these things is a pattern. So this is the going faster for less effort, and a story where I had to learn something completely non-code related to get this lesson in my head. So last September, just before I came to NG Poland last year, I decided that since a young age, who here likes Formula One or racing? A couple of people, it's not very big in Poland. So I decided that I wanted to actually be a racing driver. So this was me on September 1st last year, and I'd never driven on a track before, and it was my first car handling day. Now, if you want to be a racing driver, there are so many things you have to learn. Now, unlike code, you have fear of death with racing driving. So we want to avoid this, and by doing this, it allowed me to think a bit differently. So before I even started on this whole racing driver journey, the way that I learned, I call it leaves in the wind. It was, I still got from A to B, but I went from L and M and O and Z, and then finally arrived at B. So we kind of want to avoid this. So I'll call this the go faster for less effort. You can think of it as a program, if you like. So what is this go faster for less effort? How do you partake in it? So I've just narrowed this down to 3 simple things. Committing to the program, this is the easy one. And then breaking things down and staying within your limits. Now, whatever it is that you want to learn now or in future, if you follow these principles, I believe that you'll learn things a lot easier and faster and be able to go faster for less effort. So what does number 1 look like, committing to the program? First, we need to realize that we want to do it. I always had this burning desire to jump in a car and slide around a circuit and push people off the track, those kind of things. Now, there's also quite a large hurdle, I think, when it comes to learning, and that's people's emotions. Oh, it's too difficult, I don't want to learn this, I'm just going to avoid it. So, putting your emotions aside, hopefully you don't come off of the circuit and go into a wall or something like this. I accepted that might happen, and I tried everything to avoid this. And so far it's been okay. And finally, the most important piece is finding your own confidence inside and the belief that you can actually do something. If, for example, we have a completely new version of the web in 5-10 years, maybe even sooner, we can adopt these. We can say, hey, I'm not going to let my emotions get in the way. It's not scary. We can then find our confidence and believe that we're going to do something. When you believe that you can do something truly, I find that you approach things in a much better way. So step 2 is breaking it down. This is the fun part, the analysis of what we want to achieve. Hello? So before we get going, before I want to be a racing driver and learn all these different things, we start with the basics. What tools do I need to be able to achieve my goal? That's a simple question. So it might be that you write out a simple list. I say, okay, I need a car, I need a roll cage. If we flip the car, I need some harnesses to keep me safe. It's a good idea to have a helmet. We have some race boots, we've got some nice gloves, which you need. And finally, we need some kind of racetrack to practice. So that's a nice easy part. This is the tools. And you can think about this in your own journey, something you've done in your life. Maybe some karate black belt from Minko. And then we can start to think about, okay, so now I've got all the tools, how can we then start approaching this? And I call this the smaller components that we need to learn. So what you can do, you can make a list. I do this in my head now, or a whiteboard. And you say, okay, so to be a racing driver, I need to learn quite a lot of things, but how do I break them down? So we got things like the racing line. We need steering technique. We got braking technique, throttle technique, visual reference techniques. As you're going fast, you need to know where to brake, where to accelerate. We then need to be mindful of other cars on the circuit. There's mirrors that we need to learn. We need to learn about car balancing. We need to learn about physics behind this. We need to learn about oversteer and understeer, tyres and temperatures, and also driving in the wet. Now I think if this was just put on you all at once, it's quite overwhelming. There's a lot of things in here that we need to learn. So this is what I tend to do when I learn something new. I would just pick the core essentials. So logically it makes sense to perhaps start with these. So we learn about the racing line. Where do I need to go on the circuit? Keeping things nice and simple. Then I'm going to focus on my steering technique, braking technique, throttle technique. Once I start getting good at these things, we can then start picking other things, start getting better at other things. And then finally, we build up skills in all these different areas, and then we can learn where to focus our energy. So this is a very important piece. So we now know what tools we need. We now know what we need to learn, but we need to stay within our limits. And through driving very fast on a track, I was inclined to stay within my limits. I don't want to do something silly and smash a car up or hurt myself. And it was through doing these things that made me appreciate a different way of learning that meant that I could stay within inside my own limit, but learn very efficiently. So we'll call this good discipline and understanding. Now discipline is a very difficult thing to do, especially if you work at home, perhaps remotely like I do, and you've got no boss that tells you to wake up in the morning, you just snooze 50 times and it's midday. So we don't want to do that. So the way that I find that we can stay within our limits and start learning these new things is in short and sharp bursts. Now when we think about driving, for example, I might go and take my car to a track. I'm not going to drive round for 8 hours non-stop, and otherwise I'll probably end up in the wall. So what we did was short focused driving sessions, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes at a time. This allows you to then come back, take a break, discuss what went well and what didn't go well. We can then look at areas for improvement. So when we go out in the next session, we can say, hey, let's take this corner differently, let's try a different technique. And then when we start getting good at these things, we can then say, okay, so what's actually next on the list that we can then start introducing? Now, it's all easy, and you can think of this in a technology world, with all this ever-changing technology and things. I mean, even as we're sat here now, new technology is being written that we're going to have to learn. And I find once you go overboard, it's very hard to come back. So one of my rules is don't go overboard. You'll become very tired very quickly. Which then leads to a lack of focus, a lack of motivation. We don't want to go and learn these new things. And when we get tired and when we get bored or something, we don't want to learn something, we then practice bad habits and we end up making mistakes. And it's recognizing those bad habits and acknowledging them and saying, hey, I'm going to change the way that I do this. I'm going to create a good habit. Now, this is my favorite piece, developing what I call the instinct. So it doesn't really matter what it is you're doing. For example, if I go and open this lid, it's not the first time I've opened a bottle of water. I've created muscle memory for me to twist the cap off. Similarly with driving, you develop an instinct of driving. You develop an instinct with typing. I'm sure there's people who can type well over 100 words per minute in here. And this all comes down to muscle memory. And once our muscle memories start to pick up on things, things become easier. So it's a natural progression. Once we're then good enough, we can then start making things more difficult. So a few days, who knows where this is or what corner this is? There'll be some extra points. Awesome. We've got some racing fans in the room. So this is in Spa-Francorchamps, as apparently it's pronounced, in Belgium. Beautiful place up in the mountains. So a few days after I started learning to drive, this is one of the most challenging circuits in the world, I got invited to go here as my race instructor had somebody drop out, so I took their place. And there's all these Lamborghini, Ferrari race cars just shooting past me, and I'm this young guy sort of cowering in the corner at 50 miles per hour. But we were there for a few days, and I applied all these principles. I didn't overdo it. I thought about things. So in between this, or after this, should I say, I did one or two more track events, and I find that a lot of learning can be done in your head rather than doing. Same with coding nowadays. I don't sit there and code for 10 hours. I might think for 9 hours and code for 1 hour. So I researched all these physics and how I researched all these physics and understeer and oversteer and understood what I needed to learn. So 7 weeks after I began, I decided, okay, I'm going to try and go to Silverstone and go to race school. And I actually passed my race exam. You have to do a written, you have to learn all your flags and all these things, and then also do a lot of laps around the circuit. And it comes back to this point that through doing all of this, it's completely non-code related, but I had to learn something completely different, something in the real world that's physical, not virtually in our machines, to learn in a completely different and better way. So I'll sum it up as how I went faster for less effort. So I committed to the program, we started breaking things down, and I stayed within my limits. And through these limitations, I don't want to make a mistake, especially in England where it's never really sunny, it's wet and raining all the time. It's very easy to slide a car at 100 miles an hour in the rain. And through these limitations, I could make optimizations. I could just stay under that barrier of safety and progress. Now, realizing this optimal approach, if you want to call it that, led to expanding the idea to not just racing, but everything else. So what else can we apply this to? And these are just a couple of examples, and you can definitely think of more yourself as well. So, does anyone swim in here? Any swimmers? There's quite a lot. That's more than people learned this year. So, I started swimming a few months ago. And I'd swum as a kid and learned all these things. I never did any events or anything. I was never that good. But I decided for fitness purposes that I wanted to learn how to swim and swim up and down and get healthy, all those things that we should be doing. So what did this look like? I had to commit to the program. I had to say, Todd, we're putting on some weight. We need to start swimming and accept these things. So after committing to the program, breaking something down, we can use the same model, if you want to call it that. So what tools do I need? We'll go back to breaking it down. I need some goggles, I need some swim clothes, and a swimming pool. Now the components that I need to learn to be fairly good at swimming, I need to learn different strokes. You've got breaststroke and front crawl. We need to then think about managing breathing underwater. We need to think about physics in the water. If I hold my breath more and inflate my lungs, I'm going to float more, so I'm going to have less drag in the water. So once you start understanding all these things outside of the activity that you're doing, you can jump in the pool and start swimming fairly well. Staying within my limits, there's a lot of people in the pool, they're regular people every morning, and I'm not trying to keep up with everybody else. I want to do short sessions of well-composed lengths, up and down, not making mistakes, focusing on technique, which then leads us to developing our technique and then creating that muscle memory which we need. I can then try things like butterfly stroke and more difficult techniques. So with all that in mind, could we apply this to absolutely anything? Could we apply it to Angular? So I'm going to guess that most people in here have started learning Angular. We're committed to the program, that's why we're sat here. So the next step would be breaking it down. How do we break down, how do I learn Angular? So really, we just need a computer, we need a browser and a text editor. And some of the components that not Angular components, some of the things that we need to learn are perhaps the CLI. We need to learn about modules and modular architecture. We need to learn about components, component architecture and communication. Directives, forms, prompts, and the list continues. Staying within your limits. Now, it can get very frustrating trying to learn something brand new that's so big, such as Angular. I find if you develop small, useful applications, something like a to-do app, lots of people say, oh, don't build a to-do app, because everyone else does it, but it demonstrates a lot of the core functionality, especially if you're a little bit concerned, or maybe haven't gone too deeply in something, it's a good eye-opener. Something like a calculator, any kind of real-world examples. Now we can learn more advanced techniques and principles as time goes by. What we don't want to do if we were learning Angular is just jump in with the biggest state management monstrosity app with behavior subjects and services and facades and all these different buzzwords. So my advice is making these lists and starting small and building things up and creating that muscle memory. I think that's pretty much on time. That is my Twitter handle. I would love some questions. However, I will be outside as well. You can check out anything we do on ultimatecourses.com, and hopefully that says thank you in Dziękuję. So thank you for listening.